I want to thank you all for joining us today as we get into this conversation around DDIL and where it fits into the overall mission strategy as you're thinking about identity in and especially DoD environments. And so Andrew, Rob, Andy, Dom, Michael, we've all been working together for some time. So this isn't actually all of us coming together for the very first time and having this conversation. This is a really very real challenge that is being experienced by members of the armed forces daily. And as you think about identity being that linchpin to all access, as you think about what is that front door that controls the way and whether or not a mission is going to see a success or not in theater, you have to ensure that you have survivability and availability of identity services. And so Dom, I might actually start the conversation this morning with you as we think about this. In your own experience, in the time that you served, I'd love to hear a little bit of your story about how DDIL comes to bear as when you were serving in the Army.
Yeah, no, thank you, Mark. I was a former CAV officer in Iraq and Afghanistan, so I was excited to join this project because I've seen multiple iterations of the information dominance play within the DoD, from the SDT to the WinT. So when I joined this project, I experienced the personal pain of having our primary communication systems go down. And now that you guys have incredible systems like TAC that deliver AI services and capabilities to warfighter, you still have to eventually have to execute and go through your PACE plan. So the first story I have, Mark, you want to pull it up,
Yeah.
is at one point I was the HHT XO in Afghanistan. Our S4 was out for illness. We had to, oh, this is the second story, Mark. I can do
Oh,
this.
I apologize.
It's all good. We're running through this thing. But
Yeah,
yeah, so
please
either
go.
way, we had to do, we were at the theater QRF during the Herat bombing of the US consulate, supporting combat operations. We had to set up our initial deployment to an Italian base. So we had a bunch of non-CAC card holders, sourcing a number of supplies via manual hand receipt that caused delay within operations. But at the consulate itself, our primary and alternate and contingency systems all went down, and I had to deliver a 100-line log stat over Iridium sat phone. That took about an hour to 2.5 hours when you have that capability delays. So we didn't get our batteries in for about 48 hours for our counter ID equipment or handheld equipment. And we had the incorrect amount of 120 millimeter, an incorrect type of illumination rounds for 120 milli rounds. But I guess my point is like, we all know the mission comes first. So when your systems go degraded, you also become degraded, whether it's sleep deprivation, frustration, miscommunication on the battlefield. That's why I believe this DDIL mission is so important. Thank you, Mark.
No, and I'm glad you brought that up. So, and thank you, obviously, very much for the service and sharing the story of how this, impacted you directly. As we think about identity in the commercial side, there's a lot of places that folks often don't think about where you're thinking about physical access controls and other things that might be sitting behind identity services. And if you have a single point of failure where you're not able to access those systems, it's not just a function of not being able to access applications. It could actually be not being able to get into again, physical access controls for different facilities and things like that. And what you just shared here is what that plays out like in the battlefield and in theater. And so as we think about that definition of DDIL, so a degraded, degraded, disconnected, intermittent, or low bandwidth scenario, there's a lot of reasons why we can lose the ability to reach the network. And so I think what we're here today to talk about, and for our audience then, is to think about what impact would that sort of scenario have on your own plans and where you are in your own strategy? And so, Bryn, I know we had a question. I would love to tee it up just to sort of set the tone for our conversation right now. We have 3 polling questions. And this first question that we would love to get the audience's feedback around is to rate your current stage of ICAM readiness as you think about these DDIL situations. So that's where network connectivity is in that disconnected, degraded, it's intermittent, low bandwidth. How would you say that your plans are, your readiness is right now? So, Bryn, thank you for putting that up. We'll give everyone just a moment to respond to that. And as they're doing that, it's a scenario, and then I'll put this back to you, Dom, for just a moment, and then we'll shift to the panel a little bit. Were detail plans something that you discussed, before going in theater? Is this something that was top of mind at the time?
So it wasn't called DDIL, it was more so PACE, primary, alternate, contingency, and emergency communication and comms. We had not even advanced to the thought of even identity or our, I guess, Nipper and Sipper internet systems go down. We didn't even have that option. So this is a great opportunity, I guess, now to even think about what happens when your other communication systems that are more fluid in terms of communicating and reporting on go down rather than having to report over the radio, because that was my primary goal.
Got it. No, that's great to know. And I'll let the comments continue to come in here, and Brent, I'll grab those from you, the responses in just a moment from the poll. But this is not a new problem, as you just talked about, Dom. The story that you just shared with us, even though it wasn't called DDIL at the time, this is not a new scenario. This is not a place where whoever has access to the handset on a field radio is the one who actually owns administrative control. It's actually a world of password and credentialing that, even in deployed scenarios, is critical here. So, Rob, I might actually turn the question to you now as we think about what's been done in the past. We talked about this not being a new challenge or a new problem. So I'm guessing there were ways that the armed service members have tried to solve for this previously. I would love to get a little bit of the background from you.
Well, yeah, you're right, Mark. I mean, there have been some efforts, but none have been as successful, right, as the armed forces would have liked. We don't see many solutions today that can meet the needs that Dominic just described, right? Where when we go completely disconnected, we can continue to grant and manage permissions to applications that exist at the tactical edge. So there's not a whole lot in the market today that can meet the need. Does that answer your question, Mark?
It does, absolutely. And so, as you're thinking through the scenarios of perhaps planned or unplanned outages, what might you be able to share with the audience a little bit around how to view this in those two different lenses?
Well, I think in today's war theater scenarios, there's no way to not think about both situations where you can have comms or not have comms or be connected and not disconnected. Just with the advancement of technology, not just with the applications and services that our warfighters need at the tactical edge, but also to make sure that we can hide in plain sight, right? At times to ensure that our adversaries can't identify us because we're using legacy communication channels to leverage the tools that we need at the tactical edge. In addition to that, right, there's a huge need, right, to work with our allies, right? So we do joint missions all of the time, right? They happen. I'm sure everyone on the call knows today that's joined to listen in, right? Interacting with our allies is critical, and being able to onboard them and get them information at the tactical edge, right, is critical. Aligning our location systems and things of that nature are very critical. Things like ATAC, right, are very critical for soldiers knowing where each other are on the battlefield, right?
Indeed.
Being able to call in different, needs and resources are critical. So, yeah, hopefully that answers your question, Mark.
It does, and I might actually just dig a little bit deeper with you if you're okay with that. Is the idea is as you're thinking about the user types that are being associated here, and the frequency of being able to add somebody and remove, because
Yeah.
that's critical. You talked about this scenario where we're talking about perhaps doing exercises with
Mhm.
allies and needing to bring in armed service members from another nation to actually have access to shared resources in theater. It puts a whole new perspective around the user types for sure. Anything additional to think about from that angle?
Yeah, I guess, yeah, user types. I mean, it could be anything from a contractor to your point, right? It could be a contractor. It could be, a warfighter that has been recently deployed to a new division or a company, right? And now they need access to new resources to do their job. So that could be the case, right? Also, as you mentioned, allies, right? That may be bringing it. We may have a joint mission, right? Let's say in Ukraine, right? There's an additional force that we would like to send out there, and they need to join we need to join and be able to communicate and have access to the same resources so that we can function and operate at the speed and the pace of war, right? So those things are critical. So yeah, so I would say those would be the quote unquote actors or users, if you will. There's just some, right? But there's probably many more that exist. But our solution, right, essentially just gives the armed forces the ability to manage that process at an enterprise level, right? You have all the same IGA resources for joiner, mover, lever type of scenarios that are there. Also being able to federate really quickly and also quickly fail over, right, to an IDP that may exist, an identity provider, I should say, that exists at the tactical edge, right? Where if you cannot access the cloud, so you may log in, right, and you can no longer access, let's say, Azure, right? And now you need to re-authenticate. You can authenticate at the tactical edge via some open source solution, i.e. a key cloak. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later, I'm sure, with the demo and whatnot.
Sure.
But yes, so those things matter, right? They are very fundamental, things that are required in a zero trust type of framework that the military is pushing towards. So basically, we're bringing in this enterprise level solution for ICAM and IGA and access management and identity orchestration to the tactical edge. So hopefully that answers the question. Yeah.
It does, and I'm going to open this up to all of the panelists. Rob, you specifically, but feel free to chime in, everyone. So as we think about this, there's scenarios where DDIL occurs that can happen both for planned as well as those unplanned, unforeseen reasons. And so there's a scenario where, for lack of a better word, there's a physical control, like the big button that you're going to hit, and you're going to say, I need to switch from one identity provider to another for known strategic reasons for whatever extended duration that might be. Perhaps that's going into theater and going into a forward operating site. Perhaps that's during fueling exercises, in naval operations. There can be a lot of reasons why it's a planned scenario. There's also then the conversation around what happens if it's because you've lost connectivity, network connectivity on a whole, and from unexpected reasons, whether it's jamming, sabotage. There can be any number of those. Thoughts from our panel just about how those two scenarios differ a bit?
Sure, I can start to take this one a little bit.
Michael, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, certainly when you're thinking about sort of unplanned outages, it's as you're thinking about having a case where you have a primary identity provider and maybe even a secondary or a fractional IDP that could provide that automatic failover. That would certainly need to be thinking about how do I keep those identities provisioned, synchronized, and making sure that all of the keys do comply with our zero trust standards, that they're always using sort of a second or a strong factor of authentication. And I'm sure Andrew can talk a little bit more about this as well, but for kind of planned outages where you want to be able to kind of deploy your entire stack of applications and your identity providers and your user onboarding to something that is planning on being disconnected, you need to be able to provide a full life cycle process to make sure that the origination of your identities is sound, that they're provisioned properly in primary and secondary IDPs. And while they're in that disconnected mode, they can operate and use their applications freely without even knowing there's sort of a lack of connectivity. So purpose-built, if you will, for those kind of situations. And of course, moving from a disconnected mode into more of a connected mode, you need to be thinking about how do we make sure that nothing that happened while deployed, out to the edge happened to those identities or data while it was there. So being able to, re-enter a connected mode in a safe and sound way, making sure that there's a great level of security scanning, cleansing of any data, and that they're not bringing anything in from that disconnected mode that could possibly infect, the other identities or other systems.
Absolutely. No, that's an excellent point. Did anyone else have anything that they would like to add? Just thinking about that difference between the planned outages where it could be a duration of weeks and months, and those where you actually are truly true to the DDIL scenario of that intermittent, where you might actually be failing back and forth as network connectivity is available, and it might just be a matter of a few minutes. Any other thoughts from the panel?
Mark, I was just going to mention that the scope of need is we have to make sure we can accommodate not just the carbon or the real people, but also the non-person entities as well. Servers,
Oh,
accounts,
great point.
supporting the IoT access scenarios, because just because the connection's out doesn't mean the mission stops for those too. So we have to make sure to accommodate that.
You know, I'd actually, let's throw up our second poll question, if I could then, Bryn, because I'm actually curious. So now that we've sort of defined the state of DDIL and the difference between those disconnected mode and where it's like a known and planned outage that you can actually proactively, from a strategic perspective, actually prepare for, as well as those ones where you weren't expected. You've lost connectivity for some unknown reason. I'd love to get a feel from our audience about the duration of their DDIL events as they think to what the impact is and how long are those? Is it a slow intermittent where you're just worried about a failover and a failback? Or is it one of, I need to have a backup solution for authentication purposes for weeks on end? So Bryn, thank you for putting that up, and we'll grab the answers to that in just a moment. So as we go a little bit further here, and Andrew, I think I'm going to turn this one back to you a little bit. And actually, Michael, maybe we'll do you first. As I talked about the difference between those two states, the failover and failback, you gave some good color there about making sure that, you know, when you do reconnect, that nothing untoward, you know, that was from a security or risk perspective was brought back, so to speak. And when you reconnect. Anything else to consider, especially as it relates to like legacy and non-standard apps? So for our audience, as we're thinking about legacy and non-standard, I'm going to set a definition of a modern app being one that's capable of understanding protocols like OADC and SAML, and those non-standard ones, the gamut, headers based, cookies based, LDAP bound, lots of different scenarios. What might we consider about the application types, Michael?
Yeah, you know, to keep ICAM secure as we move between these, you know, connected and disconnected states, especially for non-standard legacy apps where you may have accumulated a lot of tech debt, we're introducing a new layer, maybe a new word, you know, to the audience you may not have heard before in the identity arena, and it's called identity orchestration. It's not an IDP per se, but it more acts as an abstraction layer, acting like a command center that coordinates between completely disparate identity systems and really serves the needs of your applications and users. So let me give you kind of a quick metaphor about identity orchestration. Maybe this can help relate. Imagine military operations base coordinating field units with unique comm systems, protocols, and equipment. The command center itself translates and routes information so everyone is securely connected, even with a diversity of toolset. Similarly, identity orchestration serves as this command center for identity, enabling these legacy apps to work seamlessly with modern identity providers. Now you're thinking about legacy apps. Well, we brought this one up a couple of times. Let's think about, what does it take to modernize a legacy app? Well, do we have time to rewrite applications from the ground up, ones that we've been relying on every day to be able to complete the mission? Let's think about the tax server. I don't think it fully understands modern standards like OIDC or SAML, but these servers are used, you know, for that real-time data sharing, location tracking are critical in the field, but we don't have time to rewrite them. This is where identity orchestration comes in. We can add modern identity like Entra ID to something like the tax server without even having to rewrite it, because our command center, if you will, takes in, translates whatever's coming from the IDP as the user authenticates and serves it up to those applications as they would need it. If the application needs headers, if the application needs LDAP, we do all of that translation and parse out those signals so the application can continue to run, thinking that nothing has ever even happened. So it enables these tax servers or any other type of legacy or even modern applications to support multi-factor authentication as well. So you can add in additional identity services, you know, as your application sees fit. And so this brings us to how do we do this? How do we enable this continuity? How do we enable people to be able to work in this unplanned outage without having to really majorly refactor the applications or have a period of downtime? Again, this is where identity orchestration kicks in, because you can have this control center that detects when a sudden network or IDP outage happens. It'll automatically fail over and kick in and reroute users to your backup identity provider, something like an Azure an AD instance, or even Keycloak, ensuring that you can continue to use those applications without any sort of disruption.
Yeah.
Now, for those planned disconnected modes, right, when you're deploying out to the tactical edge, again, identity orchestration plays a role here, sort of, so you can, by design, set up these rules to maintain secure access. So for instance, when I'm in a planned connected mode, I can set that my primary IDP is Entra ID, and that when I move into a secondary or sort of a disconnected mode, I can use something else. Those are two, kind of key concepts that identity orchestration enables. But probably most importantly at all, how do I achieve true zero trust at the edge? Identity orchestration, with the flexibility that it offers, it allows you to take these legacy and even modern applications and provide stronger factors of authentication on every single step without having to change the apps again. I say that over and over again. The cost and sort of the time and effort to modernize these applications it's just not a possibility in today's demanding environments. So if you think about these three aspects of the challenge related to legacy applications, think about the new tools that you can use at your disposal, enabled through identity orchestration, that you could bring to bear, and your possibilities and options and strategies, if you will, start to open up to you.
That's awesome, and thank you, Michael, for that. And actually, just wanted to also point out to our audience, please keep using the questions. We'll answer those at the end. But the QA tool is great. I see the questions are coming in. I just want to let you all know that we see those. And Dom, I'm actually just going to ask you a quick question. Thinking about those legacy applications during the time that you served, my hunch is that the majority of the applications probably fit those legacy patterns. And so that challenge that Michael just described of, do you rewrite the applications purely for the sake of identity? And it almost becomes a non-starter for a lot of the applications themselves.
Correct. Yeah, I mean, you can basically make the assumption that most of the systems that actually soldiers use and operate are legacy applications.
Mm-hmm.
The thing I have to think of particularly is a system called CPOF that I had the unenviable ability to use as the assistant S3 when I moved up to the S3 shop when I was in a CAV squadron deployed to the box at JRTC. We can get in more stories, details later, but my constant frustration was every single time we lose connectivity, we'd wipe out all the work in that application. We didn't have anything called like a disconnected mode. And the one thing I know is the general's going to get his storyboard and reporting is no fail. So that was always the constant frustration, to stay up until 2, 3 in the morning when you're running 72 hours of operations, that we're just begging for connectivity to come back up to finally be able to do the report and then complete the work you already started.
Wow, when you think about the survivability and the work involved, there's the conversations as we think about the mission moving forward of one of, the handoff between if somebody is critically injured or something happens, and then there's just the day-to-day work that you're talking about here that comes to a screeching halt, in those scenarios as well. So it's really interesting insight for sure. Andrew, I might actually turn this over to you a little bit, because I think one of the questions now is we're thinking about, how's this get delivered? There's this scenario of, and supported specifically. So, I'm going to state the obvious. There's 3 different organizations on our panel right now. We've got Strata Identity, where I'm a part of the team, Saviynt and OCG, of course. But it doesn't sound like this is a single vendor solution to this challenge that we're looking at here. So, as we think about like the way it's delivered and supported, thoughts about how that's going to take place?
Sure. And I do see there's a question that kind of relates to this some, and hopefully we'll kind of answer that as we go through this section here.
Okay.
If not, we can tag it very specifically toward the end here. But the very first thing to note, and I think this is a very good positive, especially with the challenges getting applications and solutions through the DoD for authorization, is the core or a substantial amount of this is actually already operating in the cloud accounts of some customers today that has an ATO. It's in production. And what we're essentially doing is taking these elements operating in Azure today, extending it, and then enabling the additional functions, some of what Michael talked about earlier, and then also packaging this with the services and capabilities you need to make it operational. Could you go ahead and bring the slide up?
You
We have
got
a
it.
presentation here.
Bear with me one moment and I'll grab that.
And as you bring it up, I kind of describe this in two layers. The first layer I'll mention verbally is really about the components that will operate together to help deliver these services. The second layer of this is the kind of the operational platform, really fundamentally looking at Azure. We'll talk about in just a minute. But if I look at these layers, and I'll add there's a corresponding parallel layer, which we won't get into as much today, but we can kind of get into it on a follow-on session with anybody that would like to. But there's always those mission applications themselves, right? So those we always want to be able to tie back to, because that's really the end game here. But what we're enabling is essentially the first. There's really, I talked about that first layer. That first layer is the components that are enabling these services. So those components on the ICAM side is really the authorization first. It's also the next, in no particular order, I'm kind of going counterclockwise.
Okay.
Is the authorization first, the orchestration, and then
Mhm.
authentication.
Okay.
Most people are certainly familiar with the authentication, and probably any DDIL solutions that have attempted to be fielded probably attempted that first. But what we've also found talking with teams is that the challenge is, even though you might have an authentication token working, the rest of that user profile may not be fully delivered or completely there. Or you may have applications that may not fully understand what the rest of that profile is, so you can't give the correct authorization when you need it. And really, when we take these three legs of the stool, the very last leg of that stool is that orchestration part mentioned over there on the left-hand side.
Mhm.
And what we enable is we take all three of those things. The other great thing about this is that this is already operating from a DevOps release capability on a Kubernetes cluster. So I'm kind of getting a little bit in the weeds, but I just mentioned that because it's a single pipeline of delivery. This isn't like a whole bunch of pipelines and you're trying to squeeze it and try to manage that. But it's really designed to operate as a single pipeline where all these elements are able to operate in a single manner and then get delivered. And you also have that security and consistency there. Now you got the components on the left-hand side. We also then is almost as crucial, or definitely as crucial, maybe more so, is the integration services to help make this work. We've got the team OCG, Rob's representing them here. They essentially are able to take all these components and get them delivered on that Azure stack that you see in the middle. Now, I will mention this is kind of where it really starts to adapt to the customer mission elements. It's really designed to be flexible in two ways. One, I kind of mentioned the customer application itself, meaning that you're going to have different applications. It might be SharePoint, it might be another custom application. That's one aspect we expect to be adaptable to. But the second is also you may have individual hardware requirements. So this solution is also flexible too. If you want to use an Azure Stack Edge that has certain capabilities out of the box, it's already IL5, IL6. That's wonderful. If you need to use a different type of Azure Stack, Azure Stack HCI or that type thing, if you have pre-prescribed hardware components and requirements, we're certainly flexible to that approach as well. And that the reason I mentioned that flexibility on hardware is a lot of times when you move to the right and you got vehicles, I'll just call them generically mission systems, they each many times may have their own hardware requirements. So we're prepared to be flexible for that as you move that direction. The last thing I'll quickly mention is from a zero trust, there's a concept called zero standing privilege. We'll see this more in the demo here in just a minute, but that concept of zero standing privilege is such that if you're to move your mouse and your cursor all the way to the left, we want to make sure that there's a capability so that user does not exist at all ever before. You can rapidly bring that user on. You can authenticate, you can support them if it gets disconnected. And then almost just as important, when you're done, you can pull that user out. There's no zombie accounts. Disposition is fast, quick, and secure. So
And so
That's
that scenario could be one of moving between forward operating sites, which each is acting independently. It could be that scenario of the user types that Rob introduced us to, of allies during an in-theater exercise, and being able to as easily add and remove as needed in the field.
very much so. And you could be swapping out mission partners, right? You may have same exercise, but you're swapping out mission teams for the same asset or software asset. So all
Gotcha.
of it. Yeah. So
So just as a panel, as we're thinking about this, so you mentioned just a moment ago, I should have led off, and I apologize. I didn't tell our audience that we actually are going to do a demo here. Obviously, there's a lot of conversation that we're having around what the solution looks like, but I think the proof of the pudding is really seeing this in action. And this is something that our 3 organizations have demoed at several different conferences to date already. And so, is there any other thoughts from the panel? Or should we just get right into it? Let's take a look at how this thing works and have at it. All right, I'm going to take that as a nod. Let's go. And so, Michael and Andrew, I'm going to give the floor back to you all and let you take us through the demo experience.
All right. Okay. All right. So we're going to first talk to you about what the demo flow is. Andrew, what are we going to be demoing, stepping people through today?
sure. Yeah. So the what you're seeing here, and I'll give you like a 30-second explanation, is everything in that dashed line, that's essentially the Azure stack. So in the prior slide, we had the picture of the left, medium, and the right. That stuff that you see in the dashed line, that's the Azure stack components. That's the boundary of which we can support if it goes offline. Just so you'll know, you got that legend. But if you go ahead and click the first button to build it out, the very first thing we're going to do in this user experience, as far as the demo, is show the user onboarding. We're going to bring at least one user in. They'll have access to some assets. And then the next step, if you could go ahead and build the next one. The next little twos that you see in circles there, those represent the ability the user is attempting to authenticate to existing application when in a connected mode. When you're connected and you have access to those assets, great, but there are certainly times when you will not have access. So if you can click the next button, build it out. And certainly the next step is to make sure and validate that we can access those assets when you're disconnected. You'll also note the key click there in the middle, it is within that boundary. So that means our authentication component is inside that Azure stack. So it's a self-enclosed capability set there. You can click the next build out. And the very last step to this, we talked about ZSP as zero standing privilege. So this is kind of that subcomponent of zero standing, of zero trust architecture, where we're not just talking about the network and the identity in general, but very specific. We want to make sure that no one has access before you need it. And the very last step of that is to make sure that no one has access after you don't need it. So we can, very last step is offboarding, pull those users out, and then you can be off to the next exercise or return. Back to you, Michael.
All right. So we're now in the state of part 1, where we're going to onboard the user to DDIL. First, let's check and see if the user exists. And we're going to go to users. And the user account that we're working with today is CLI. And there is no CLI in our user directory. Carolee. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to onboard them. And let me get to the job. And, all right. Oh, wait, sorry. Job. And. All right, Andrew, what's next?
Yeah. So as you click that button, I'll just make a quick mention. We're doing an import of that user. I talked about flexibility and adaptability. We're talking about a user source that could be coming from a directory, but it also could come from a user list. You may get a user list from a mission partner or something else. So very flexible to that extent as well. You can go back to our screen here. There we go.
And let's see if the job finished. Not quite there yet.
Yep. While it's running, I'll kind of mention some quick other things from an offboarding perspective. So it's not just about bringing the users in, but it's also about, we hear terms about RBAC and ABAC and applying security. So what we're also doing in this offboarding process is really kind of going through 3 different backend flows to kind of make sure that the user is getting the right access at the right time, even at the very beginning. So part of this is the first part of that flow is just getting the data in initially. The second part of that flow is actually getting the user and making sure that they might have access to certain groups and those types of things. So what we'll see in the login in just a minute, when that occurs, the user would have been in the right group and the right access to get there. The very last one is if someone didn't have access, they existed as a user, but they need more access, you want to have ability to request more. And so that certainly that's a part of this flow eventually as well.
Perfect. And Andrew, I'm just going to interrupt for one moment just so our audience understood. The poll questions just came back, and this is actually perfect. I just wanted to keep you going just so you knew that our audience saw the responses. Yep. So it's a pretty even spread as we were asking about where the audience is in terms of their ICAM readiness. So y'all keep doing your work here, but it's fairly even across the nascent, midpoint, and advanced levels, and then a few more are actually saying they're unsure. So this is great. Demo, keep going, and just wanted the audience to know we saw the poll response.
Yeah. So you can see here, Carol Lee is now in the system, ready to go. If there's additional accounts that were brought in by attribute-based access control, that would have popped up under that tab, as well as additional entitlements and resources. For our purposes, we just want to make sure that person's there, and then that'll get us back over. So I'll hand it back to you, Michael.
All right, step 1 is complete. Moving on to step 2. So let's talk a little bit about identity orchestration. So what I have here is the Mavericks console, and what we're doing is we're defining a strategy for us wanting to be in a connected or disconnected mode. And so in this case, this is for an auto failover strategy, and where Entra ID is my primary IDP, and you can monitor the health of it in case of an unplanned outage. Or you can do a custom health check where you can have a planned outage. And so what I'm going to be showing you here today is the planned outage, or the planned disconnected mode, I should say. So way you, and of course we define the applications that we support, whether we're supporting those legacy type of applications or we're standing up support for OIDC or SAML-based applications. And it's all brought together through the user flows. And so the user flows define what the user will see and how the application will react when they have different types of identity providers coming into play at the same time. And so our particular case, we have a DDIL Army application that currently understands SAML. We're going to use the DDIL strategy for failover and fallback. And we're also going to be giving it some claims. Again, this translation layer allows you to use a universe of claims and translate them into a common mapping, if you will, so that the user will always have access. So we simply go and deploy that. We can deploy it out to these sort of bootstrapped orchestrators that are running out on the tactical edge. So let's take a look at what the user flow looks like in action. So I have my simulator here of moving in between connected and disconnected modes. So let's hide some other stuff. So if I go and sign in now, I'm going to be expecting to hit Entra ID, and I'll gain access to my application. Of course, it's going to prompt me with Entra. Oops. And I have the...
And just for clarity for our audience, Michael, as you're doing this, what you're suggesting here is because we have access to Entra ID, that means, of course, we have network connectivity. We have clear and visible access, so we're up.
That's right. We're currently in connected mode.
Great.
Good call out, Mark. Yep. All right. I sign in, and this is expected here. So we're first onboarding this particular identity. And so the identity system is going to ask us for some security questions. And what's your favorite food? Mine is pizza. Save, great. And now Carolee is into the application that she wants to use. So now let's move into a disconnected mode. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell the orchestrator to run in disconnected mode. And because I still have, the orchestrator is holding on to the session, I still have access to my application as long as the token allows. But if I were to start a brand new session, and I go and hit the application, it's now moved over to my fractional IDP or key cloak. Let's see, this is...
Michael, while you're tapping in, I'll typing in, sorry, I'll make a mention here is that we're using username password, but both these systems have ability and really the provisioning side on the governance piece also helps enable this too, is to make sure that when you log in that you're going to have the all the attributes you need to do multi-factor as well, right? So we're showing login, but you can certainly use your CAC and YubiKeys or other MFAs in this process.
Yeah, good call. Yeah, passwords are hopefully will be in our rearview mirrors and not too short of a time, and we'll be able to have stronger authentication everywhere. So that shows you moving in and out of connected and disconnected mode. Okay, so now that I'm in now I want to talk about the last step in our demo, and that is offboarding the user. So take it away, Andrew.
Yeah, thank you. So I'll give you two quick methods to do this. The first one is the most visible. If you go to the one-click disable, I think you're there already. We simply type in the user. The use case of this is if a single individual is moving from one theater to another, they're no longer part of the operation. All we have to do is click this one. And then after you click the checkbox for the user, you click the remove button. And you click, you put whatever comments you want to just for record keeping. This is so overly simple, it actually obscures the rest of the plumbing that's going on. But essentially, as soon as you click yes, and that user is made inactive and essentially removed from access, you're not just removing this one user, but you're actually removing access from all other components that it's talking to. Active Directory, if Active Directory is there, SharePoint, any kind of custom applications, whether it's like a legacy, legacy type of application, a database application, any of those, this is going to automatically reach out. And you already now see, as Michael just did, a validation that as soon as that user is gone, login is no longer there because the user no longer has a profile. So there is one other way we can also do this. If many times you may have an entire everything from just a battalion all the way up to an entire division that needs to move out of the system or out of the theater. We also have, if you pull up the jobs, we can do a cleanup and actually fully remove entire groups at a time. So I mentioned ABAC. I'll close this out to say, I mentioned the term ABAC. If the changes happen on the ABAC side, any change that happen based off an attribute, that can also be done. We actually do that today in production. As filters get updated, users and profiles will automatically get synchronized as well in this process. The very last thing that is a bit of plumbing aspect is there's a set of capabilities to also look at the security of what happened before you cut over or before you go to the other IDP and come back live. So we were in a disconnected mode before. So before we go back live, we have some analytics to look at user risk, but there's also integrations to make sure and look at that from the broader network as well to support that. So I'll hand it back to you, Michael, and or Mark.
All right, that was great. Well, I think as smoothly as that went, it's always like the best identity demos are the least eventful, unfortunately. But it was great to be able to see behind the scenes about how this was set up and how that actually played out, and especially with the offboarding to ensure the ease of use of adding users as they move between forward operating sites and such. So as we think about this, and I interrupted you, Andrew, and I apologize again. would love to see the results that we had from that first poll around how long those DDIL activities happen. Bryn, do you happen to have the responses for the question number 2 handy that we could see? Just to take a look at, is it one of these states of short duration? Okay, so great. So hopefully the audience can see this as well. As we look at the spread here, it looks like the majority is sort of 50% of our respondents said that this is actually an indefinite or ongoing disconnected state. So one where it actually full operations are expected to happen for an indefinite period of time. And then we had the other 2 in that hour to 24 hours to several weeks. So obviously seeing this. Thoughts, Andrew, Michael, Rob, about the duration?
Yeah, I think that that could be very. This is kind of what I was expecting, right?
Is it?
So
Okay.
yeah, I think that outages like these, happen kind of less often. It may not be the service provider per se, but it may be something in the network or something in the network which causes a degraded service. So, instead of having just snow days, if you will, when something is completely down in those unplanned outages, you now have a plan, you now have a strategy, which is pretty cool. But the indefinite and sort of ongoing disconnected modes certainly, make a lot of sense. Especially since we're talking about the tactical edge here today.
That's great. Well, and Brent, I know we had a third question that if I could have you bring up the third poll question as we think about PACE, as Dom, you described that primary alternate contingency and emergency plan on the battlefield. Would like to get a feel from our audience about if you were to experience the DDIL, scenario where you have the degraded or disconnected state, what sort of overall impact do you feel that that's going to have on your specific mission capabilities? And so you can see the 4 options that we have up here, and I'll ask the audience to take a moment to respond to these, and then we'll take a look at the answers in just a moment. Dom, I might actually tee you up. I know that you and I were talking before the webinar and I accidentally spilled it a little bit by giving a slide extra. Being able to understand just how this impact hits in your world in theater. Do you mind if I tee you up again for just one more scenario and real world story that you had?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, let's take a look. Make sure I've got hopefully the proper slide lined up for you this time. Is this?
Yeah, no, this is it. And
Okay.
I know we talk about all the warfighter and tactical edge scenarios, but we all have the CONUS unfun scenarios where we talked about before about JRTC being in the box, sweating it out, having the CPOF system go down. But I know it affects more than just CPOF. There's ARMA, which is the maintenance application for gunnery. So ordering parts, not having your chief sit in the motor pool and have to twiddle his thumbs with the rest of the unit. But I had a personal one where the S2's D-SIGs kept on going out when we were in the box. And he had to be up for about 72 hours. And eventually, after making a drive out with his Humvee with his TC at night, he backed into the 15K generator that basically depowered all pop operations of the TOC. Because we lost that communication ability, we had the unenviable record of being completely wiped out by Geronimo during that situation. We just don't want to have those scenarios where even we know the mission comes first, you have to report, you have to achieve, that's the end goal. You have to Charlie Mike no matter what goes on. But when you're disconnected or in a degraded state, it affects second and third order effects where you become sleep deprived, you become frustrated, unable to communicate properly, and can run into generators. So that's not the actual picture of the generator up there. I didn't want to rat him out and sew it up there right now, but I think we all experienced these things in the past, especially if you have conducted operations, whether it's in the box at NTC or JRTC, to being deployed overseas. And it's just a safety concern that always I've lived with, and always I've not had an unenviable experience of personally going through it.
I appreciate the levity, and that's great. And Bryn, thank you for bringing this back up. I think that this probably the results that we see here for the impact that the attendees would feel. This time we actually did get a completely even spread across those. Any surprises, Dom, on that that we see here?
No, I mean, that makes perfect sense to me. I mean, everybody's able to execute the mission. There's always the manual processes, but really thinking and working through exactly how the mission is affected when you can't get AI services delivered for CDEs and other critical mission aspects of it, and how it affects your, not just the mission itself, but the op tempo, how it slows things down and be able for you to make decisive decisions and movements on the battlefield.
Got it. Got it. Well, panelists, I can't thank you enough for where you've taken us so far, going through the demo, setting up the challenge, Dom, the real world experiences that you've had with this. We have a couple of audience questions here. And Andrew, I think you said you might be able to grab those. Do you mind starting with those?
Yep, there's two here. One of them is a kind of a broader question about being able to leverage components and how can you have an approach to leverage the cloud components that are getting kind of really advocated for, and at the same time still have these capabilities. So what we've essentially have proposed, and you might be able to see this in the slide we had earlier, is some components that are give the local capacity. So we used an example of KeyCloak as a directory and IDP. That could be adaptable to what the mission is, but the key components are having in our case, is having the IGA component there that can be flexible to it. You got the orchestration, and the other almost the most important as well is having the support services and the actual Azure Stack architecture, and that can really take you to help address those. The last is very much specifically about data synchronization and how do you capture data risk of users. So the other good thing about this is we have an existing out-of-the-box integration with Azure Identity Protection. So as data is captured, or say, for instance, you're ready to rotate back to your main primary connection, you have the option to run risk analytics against all the users who are actually an entire identity pool. And then as you do that, we can actually send back the risk metrics back to Azure Identity Protection, or Entra, and then it can actually reapply that and change our risk level, do the conditional access as appropriate. So that would be a recommended approach, which is basically to use existing integrations there. Over.
No, that was perfect. Any other thoughts, panelists, to add to those?
Yeah, certainly. I think as he talked about, being able to identify the IDPs that would really suit the mission. In our case, when you have this abstraction layer with identity orchestration, you can kind of pick and choose from any identity services that you have on hand. And it's probably most typical to have something like a KeyCloak that is open source and deployable, but certainly having AD there as your secondary IDP. And with identity orchestration, you can make sure that you're using the strongest authentication even in front of that AD and disconnected mode.
Got it. Well, I think we're just coming up on time here with just a couple of minutes left. I wanted to maybe just do a quick round robin with any closing thoughts from our panelists. Rob, I might actually, not to put you on the spot, but put you on the spot. Just quick closing thoughts as we think about the challenges, about how we're solving for this today.
No, first of all, thank you, God. Thank you all for your time in coming to the webinar today. We appreciate that. In addition to that, we realize, functioning in a zero trust framework is critical. And we feel like the solution that we have developed and designed and are bringing and presenting today can help you and your organization kind of continue to progress your zero trust initiatives as a whole. And just happy to have this time today again. And hopefully you guys reach out and we can talk more. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Andrew, how about you? Oh, Dom, sorry. Andrew, Dom.
Oh, no, I was waving goodbye.
Go ahead, Dom.
Oh, Andrew,
Closing
thoughts, Andrew. Yes.
Yeah, oh, sure. I'll go next, I guess. So, the thing I would say is to take some kind of action, right? I know that's generic, but if you're not sure, the very first step is to get educated. And if you're on this webinar, you're listening here, you are taking the very first action already. You're getting educated, and the second thing is the next step is to really kind of understand what this looks like and start to match that with your use cases. And certainly, any of us would be happy to do a follow up as you have interest. So please do reach out to your Carahsoft representatives and contacts, and they can absolutely get you in contact with ourselves here for a follow up. We'd very much look forward to supporting you in the mission. That's all I have.
Great.
Thank you.
Michael, Tom?
Yeah, I just want to thank all the partners for all of the work that we've done here together, for Carahsoft for bringing us to you, the audience, for Oxford Computer Group for being able to set the stage with a fully serviceable solution, Saviynt for its amazing tech in the world of IGA and everything under the sun there, and of course my fellow Mavericks from Strata. Sitting on the edge with the Mavericks identity orchestration at its forefront. So it takes a village to have a real solution in place. And we look forward to exploring more about this. So please hit us up. We'd love to talk to you about it.
Dom, I think he spoke morally for the both of us there. I couldn't say it better. Yes.
100%. Yeah. The only thing this solution's there to prevent dare I was war stories that I was telling. So hopefully you guys have less.
That's it. That's it. Well, we want to thank our audience, and Bryn, I'm going to hand it back to you as to help close us out.
Awesome. I'd like to thank our participants today, as well as Andrew, Mark, Michael, Dominic, and Robert for being with us. We hope the information you received during this webinar has been helpful to you and your organization.